beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. On today's video I'll be showing you how to draft a basic bodice pattern. So the materials you need for this project are a pair of scissors, a French curve, a straight ruler, a fabric marker, a pen, and a measuring tape. First of all, you want to fold your pattern paper into two and then pin it, sellotape it down with either a masking tape or a sellotape like I have done here. This will prevent your fabric paper, your paper, from shifting while you are still working on it. So after doing that, the first thing you want to do is to insert your vertical measurement. First, you want to mark your shoulder line like I'm doing so you mark your shoulder line. This is going to serve as a guide to inserting other measurements. So now I'm going ahead to insert my actual vertical measurement. From my shoulder to my bust point is 10 inches. From my shoulder to my waist is 16 inches, and then from my shoulder to my hip line is 24 inches. So up next, I'm going to draw these markings into a straight line and then write out what each line is actually for. This step is very important because you don't want to get confused at the end of the day. So I'm going to mark this into a straight line and then write out what each line represents. Now for the neck, to get your shoulder slope, you need to mark two measurements which are standard for an average woman. First, you mark 3 inches and then you mark 8 inches, and from that 8 inches you come down by 1 inch. This is to get your shoulder slope. The reason you are doing this is because the body is kind of slanting, it's not straight, so you have to get your shoulder slope. From that 1 inch, you mark a straight line to the 3 inches. So now next thing is for you to get your armhole length. You can measure round your armhole, or you can use the method which I used here, which is my bust is 34 divided by 6 plus 1.5, that is 7 inches. So if you don't know how to get your armhole length, you can use this measurement. Your bust divided by 6 plus 1.5, that is another method to get your armhole length. Or you can decide to measure your armhole round. So after doing that, you draw a straight line. This line becomes your chest line or your upper bust. The next step is for us to insert our circumference measurement. So the bust I'm working with is 34 inches. 34 divided by 4 is 8.5, but because it's around the armhole, I'm adding half an inch seam allowance. This is because it makes it easier for you to move your hand and fold your hand after sewing. If you don't do this, you discover that after sewing it might be too tight. So I'm marking 9 inches for the bust, and then my waist is 28. 28 divided by 4 is 7, but I'm adding extra 1 inch seam allowance for the dart. So if you want your blouse to have a dart, you add extra 1 inch seam allowance. So for my hip, the hip I'm working with is 36. 36 divided by 4 is 8.75, but I also added half an inch seam allowance, so I'm marking 9.5 inches. So after marking this, the next step is for you to take a straight ruler and connect the lines as I'm doing here. You have to carefully connect the lines so that it's straight. If you have a hip curve, you can use it to curve out the line. After joining the line, you use a French curve to actually curve out the waistline to give it that nice curve. Instead of a sharp edge, you use the French curve to curve out the waistline and also the hip line to give it a nice curve. As you can see, our bodice pattern is gradually coming together. So the next step is for us to get our front armhole and our back armhole. To do this, you have to find the midpoints of your armhole like I'm doing so. Usually what I do is just to fold my measurement, my tape into two like I'm doing here. Just fold it in two, find its midpoint, and then mark the midpoint on your paper like I'm doing here. Instead of calculating, our advice is just mark the midpoint, fold your tape just the way I did here, and then from that midpoint you mark, you go in by 3/4 inch. This is how you get your front armhole. You mark 3/4 inch in, and then mark a straight line from the shoulder to that point you made in the middle of the armhole length as I'm doing here. And then the next thing you want to do is use your French curve to curve it out like this. This instrument actually makes it very easy and neat. And for the back, you also use your French curve to find a nice curve from the that middle point you marked to the bust measurements you marked on the bust line, just like I have done here. So the front armhole is deeper than the back armhole. So yes, that's just how you get your armhole. And for the neck width I'm working with is 3 inches. You can decide to do any width you want, but for me 3 inches is okay. And for the depth, I'm working with 3.5 inch. And also decide the depth you want depending on how deep you want your neckline to be. So you connect those two markings with the French curve. Like I said before, your French curve makes it very easy and neat. So for the back neck, you come down by 1 inch. Remember that the width you use for your front is the same width you will use for your back. You cannot use different width. Like I use 3 inches for my front width, I'm also using 3 inches for my back width. But for the depth, you can decide to use whatever you want depending on how high or low you want it. Next up is the dart. To get your dart, you have to measure your bust pan. What I mean by your bust span is the distance from one nipple to the other. Like the bust span for an average person is 7.5 inches. 7 plus half an inch, that is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2, that you get 4 inches. So I'm going to mark 4 inches on my bust point, on my waist, and on my hip line. After marking 4 inches, from your hip line you come up by 2 inches, like I'm doing here, and then you draw a straight line from that 2 inches. You connect the lines from the bust point to the 2 inches you came up with from the waist line. So you have to really take your time to connect these lines to ensure that you get a straight line. There's no rush in life, so just take your time and do it. So from this your waistline, you are going to minus 1 inch from the two sides. Remember, you added extra 1 inch for your dart. So now half an inch on each side of the lines you've made, if that makes sense. So from your bust point you come down by 1 inch, and this point you've made, you're going to mark a straight line with your ruler to that half an inch you marked on the other side, and do the same thing to the both sides. So yes, that's what you do. Connect the lines carefully. Remember, you don't have to hurry, because it's better to take your time and get a good result than to rush, and at the end of the day you discover that what you are planning to achieve, you're unable to achieve it. So yeah, just take your time, connect the lines just the way I'm doing here. So we are done with our pattern marking. The next thing is for us to cut out the pattern so we can get our front and our back pattern. Remember that you must always cut out the back pattern first before you cut out the front. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut the pattern out. Now that we have gotten our back pattern, it's actually time for us to get our front pattern. So what we're going to do is to trim off the markings that we did for the front pattern. And yes, that's basically it. That's all there is to making a bodice pattern. So but for the back, if you want to place your back dart, you have to come down by 1 inch from the chest line. Remember, we came down by 1 inch from the bust point from the first front pattern, but for the back you come down by 1 inch from the chest line. If you want me to do a tutorial on the back pattern, I'll be here. Just send in your request on the comment section. Also, if you have any question for me or anything you want me to make, any tutorial you want me to do, just leave it down in the comment section. Please guys, subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up if it has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you. I'll see you in my next one.